Welcome everyone to the Faith and Climate Summit. I'm Joshua Bassifin, the Director of Climate Action at Parliament of the World's Religions. I want to first let you all know that this summit is being recorded. And I also want to give recognition to the many co-sponsors of this event, and we're so grateful to have partnered with some phenomenal organizations. So our co-sponsors are Anglican Communion, Boomi Global, the Center for Earth Ethics, Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, Earth Day Network, EcoSeek, Faith in the Common Good, the Islamic Society of North America, the LOCA Initiative at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, the Parliament of World's Religions, Suu Kyi, the UN Climate Change Conference UK 2021, UN Environment Program, Faith for Earth Initiative, and the World Resources Institute. The world is at a pivotal moment in our efforts to fight climate change. Just over a month ago, the IPCC issued a report that has been called a code red for humanity, warning that we have 10 years to turn the global economy in the right direction. That report confirms what many have long suspected. Even if the world implements dramatic climate mitigations now and slashes global emissions, we will almost certainly exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set by the Paris Climate Accord. Droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, and other extreme weather events have ravaged many parts of the globe this year. And of course, we are in the midst of a global pandemic, one related to and exacerbated by climate change. At a time when the global community should be rallying around climate change mitigation efforts, the prospects for action feel tepid to us. Our colleagues in the UK, many of whom are with us today, have been working tirelessly, particularly given the constraints of a global pandemic, to give COP26 a fighting chance for real leadership and enduring change. Yet the nationally determined contributions formulated by member states thus far have not met the level of ambition that is needed. Attendance at COP26 by developing countries, those most at risk from climate impacts, is in doubt due to low vaccination rates, and important world leaders like President Xi of China have not committed to attending. What this means for us, those of us working in the Interfaith Climate Action Movement, is that we must redouble our efforts. We cannot lose sight of the rare and important role that we play representing billions of people with a potentially massive influence over policy and public opinion. The Faith and Climate Summit is an opportunity to engage in dialogue about that role and to better understand where and how we should invest our resources and in what ways we can help each other in the work ahead. So thank you again for being with us. I am going to now run through our agenda. So we'll start out with a little bit of discussion about the importance of this current moment. We'll hear from David Hales and Corinna Gore, who I'll introduce in a moment. Then we will go into updates from the UK COP26 unit and have a little bit of Q&A. And then we'll move into some questions that our Interfaith COP26 group has formulated to help spur some discussion about our role and the sorts of things that we want to engage in. We'll have a robust discussion. We'll also have an opportunity for folks to announce commitments, if that's something that you'd like to do. And then we'll close out. We've scheduled 2 hours for this summit, but we may not need the entire time. We're going to let the session flow organically. Again, this is, we want this to be very discussion based. And so we will use however much time we need for everyone to be able to speak and make some important connections. One more thing before we go to David and Corinna. We're going to be using Zoom in a very specific way for this summit. So you'll see that you have both a chat function and a Q&A function. The chat function, we would like folks to be putting resources and comments into the chat. We had a previous webinar, we had lots and lots of resources, and we were able to collate those resources and create an anthology, which was really great. So for the chat function, please use that for comments and resources. If you have questions or you would like to speak about an issue during the discussion, use the Q&A function, which you'll also see next to the chat function. So with that, let's go to David Hales. David is the chair of the Climate Action Task Force at Parliament of the World's Religions, and as a diplomat has represented the United States in numerous negotiations on climate change, urban affairs and policy, and biodiversity. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Joshua. And, if I could also start with a little bit of an apology and a good morning to Susan Hendershot. Interfaith Power and Light is also one of our sponsors, and I think as you were reading through the massive list, which we're so pleased with, I think we left off Interfaith Power and Light. And so Susan, an apology. The next month or so will be a terrifically important chapter in the history of the Anthropocene. The period of time when humans have become a force of geological properties, proportions. We tend to focus, as we look at this story, and it's a very complex story, on the challenge, the catastrophe. Maybe we should even change the name to the catastrophe. We look at all the things that are wrong, all the challenges that are not being met, and it's easy to focus on that side of the story, but there's another side of the story which is just as important, and that's what we're all doing to get ready for climate change. Faith-based actions particularly, but NGOs, civil society as a whole, when you look at what is being accomplished, it is a story of courage, it's a story of creativity, it's a story of commitment. And if our governments would match what we're seeing from citizens and even some businesses, there would be a basis for real optimism. Unfortunately, they're not. And even the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom noted that there is almost a 50-50 chance that we will make significant progress at COP26. In particular, the US and China seem willing to sacrifice the interests of so many and even the lives of so many around the world to narrow national interest. It's as though those two major powers and other powers are driving headlong into the future with their eyes firmly fixed on the rearview mirror. They're looking backwards. And that definition of national interest is not going to get us to the place that we need to be to protect the future of the world, to bring us to a point of sustainability and to end the use of fossil fuels. So as we go through this, let's keep in mind both of these stories. The story of the challenges that are unmet, but also the story of the courage and the commitment and the creativity that we're seeing from civil society and others around the world. And let's emphasize both because we're not starting from scratch. We are along the way to doing what we need to do to prepare our world for sustainable societies. And what we need now is for our countries, our nations, and particularly the US and China, to step up with real ambition, looking to the future, not the past.
Thank you so much, David. And now we're going to go to Corinna Gore for a few words. Corinna is the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. The floor is yours, Corinna.
Thank you so much, Joshua, and thank you to the co-conveners, the partners for this very important gathering. The world's religions and faiths are diverse, and even within each of them, there are divergent beliefs. That is actually precisely why interreligious dialogue is so powerful. It is not about converting or proselytizing or one-upping each other. It is about expanding our minds and hearts and distilling what we hold in common. The world's faiths share a sense that values run deeper than politics or price tags, that life has meaning, including non-human life, and that there is some form of higher power to which our actions are ultimately accountable. These things actually have corollaries in secular thought. The vast majority of the world identifies with some religious tradition. In some cases, that runs even deeper than identification with a nation state. Will any of this make any difference at COP26? That is the question that we are here to pose and answer. So we must see clearly what we are up against. And people who come from faith communities who study religion and moral philosophy are far from naive. In fact, in many cases, it is those people who see most clearly when there are things like structural evil at work, where people, what is claimed is masquerading as good, even though we know it is part and parcel of the destruction. We must see clearly that climate change is a consequence of a pattern set by the current dominant value system, which is not ethically neutral. It is based on short-term monetary gain, no matter the pollution, depletion, or inequity that results. And two of these things are the very mega trends, pollution and depletion, that are destroying the environment that we live within and depend on. The third one, inequity, also plays a role in that destruction, and it corrupts our very ability to perceive our situation clearly and respond as a coherent collective. We need to look at the root cause of this crisis. We can no longer afford to perceive the Earth as an inanimate set of resources to be dominated. We must realize we all exist within a living biosphere that requires us to have an ethos of reciprocity with it. There is no new technology that will make us do that, but there is a wealth of wisdom. There are three basic roles that faith communities play. There may be others, but this is how I like to think about it: the prophetic, the pastoral, and the practical. The prophetic is telling the truth, now more important than ever. The pastoral is bringing communities together, and through this process, through these losses, which are not only monetary and material losses, we're dealing with losses that are spiritual, that are cultural. We need to marshal all of what that means in order to create the counterforce against it. And of course, the practical. We do need to look and get our own house in order when it comes to things like divestment and houses of worship, and making sure that we are living out our values that we are preaching or promoting to others. But this getting our own house in order is about more than just those types of practical things. We also need to face the fact that religious communities and traditions and institutions have in some ways, in some times and dimensions, been complicit in getting us to where we are. How do we push back against that? We do it in a deep way within each of our own traditions, and I really commend those who are gathered here who are doing that. And we also must, within interreligious dialogue, take care that we don't privilege those traditions that have been the most dominant in the world in getting us to this point. We must listen to East Asian, to Indic, and particularly indigenous traditions to understand what they bring to this interreligious dialogue so that we can correct course. And I want to say a word because I heard at the convocation of Union Theological Seminary something Professor Cornel West said when he spoke that I think is also important for us to recall as we think about the role of faith communities in COP26. He was saying that the call is not only to speak truth to power, it is to speak truth with the relatively powerless. Because in this situation, it is those people, it is those that have been left out, it is those people who have yet to be activated on that heart and spirit level and get involved that will make the difference. We know politics can let you down. It can let all of us down. It's not the realm of politicians and bureaucrats to do this kind of imagining and visioning and manifestation. This is the role of those who are drawing from that deeper level. And so whatever the commitments that are happening there, oftentimes they're not good enough. We cheer them, but we know they're not good enough. Whatever the commitments are or the commitments aren't, whatever the politicians do, there is something else going on at COP26. And that is what we must be involved in. We must cultivate from the ground up. We must learn from people within communities. And we must come together in a way that we have never done before. And so in closing, I just want to say we all know that this crisis is about more than data and technology, as important as those things are. We are very sober and cognizant of the fact that we are in an urgent and dire situation, and that more than half of the greenhouse gas pollution that is up in the atmosphere now has been put up there in the last 20 years, which is when we've known the most about the cause and effect of this problem. And it's also true that nearly half of the infrastructure carrying fossil fuels, the main driver of climate change, has been built since just 2004. So these are sobering facts that can really drive home the fact that this is not just about those matters. It is about perception, beliefs, ethics, and values. That is the realm that we are existing within, and we recommit ourselves to coming together to face this existential challenge and come out stronger with a more beautiful, just world to share. Thank you.
Amen, Corinna. Well said.
Indeed. Thank you for those insights, Corinna. I so appreciate you lifting up that the voices of marginalized people and your work to help us truly hear them, and for keeping us honest and on task. So thank you so much. We've been very privileged at Parliament of the World's Religions to have a partner in the UK COP26 unit. And I just want to say that particularly at this moment, with just a month to go and what's maybe the most challenging conference of parties in UNFCCC's history, really commend them for the work that they've done, and what I'm sure is many hours put into to make this conference not just a logistical success, but also a substantive success. So we're very lucky to have Charles Ogilvie here. Charles is the Director of Strategy at the UK COP26 presidency, and he's going to share some updates from the unit. And we'll have a brief Q&A after Charles speaks. I'm hoping Charles is there. He looks a little bit frozen. Assuming we can get him, we will have a little bit of Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, again in the Q&A chat. Charles says he has lost sound. That's not good. I think perhaps we should give Charles an opportunity to get technical stuff back in order, and come back to him. And then, oh, I see he's coming off mute. Charles, can you hear us?
Hi, is that better?
Yes. We can hear you. There's a little bit of a delay perhaps, but let's give it a go. No, I think we may not have you.
Sorry. My
Yeah, Charles, I think your connection is pretty slow, or a bit rough. You could try cutting off your camera, somebody suggested in the chat.
Am I-
Okay, I think maybe we'll give Charles a minute to see if he can get back on. Let's move on to I'm gonna put my slides back up and talk a little bit about commitments. So the first thing that we want to do is talk a little bit about some questions that our Interfaith COP26 group has formulated around what we can discuss in the summit. So we call these the way forward questions. And they are, how can we as faith-based organizations ensure COP26 marks the turning point for a new global climate policy framework? That's the first one. What themes should be at the top of the interfaith agenda to be advocated for? Second question. And which conditions are necessary to translate the outputs of COP26 into a longer legacy of faith-based climate action? So we're going from how we can inform and participate in COP26 to make sure that it use our power to make sure it becomes a turning point, into what are the themes that we think we as an interfaith community can best bring to the fore, into the sort of enabling conditions that are necessary to translate whatever comes out of COP into a longer legacy and our work going forward. So we're going to have a discussion around these questions, and we're also going to have an opportunity for folks to announce or discuss any climate commitments that they want to talk about. So I'm going to just mention a few climate commitments that I think are really robust, that we have found in our scanning, and then we'll go into discussion. So in the area of divestment, the Church in Wales has committed to net zero carbon emissions, ideally by 2030, and to divest entirely their funds from fossil fuels. Congregation Kolot Chayenu, based in Brooklyn, became the first Jewish synagogue in the US to publicly divest from fossil fuels. In the area of congregational greening, two commitments there: the ancient 13th century Hindu Sun Temple in the town adjacent to it of Konark, I hope I'm saying that correctly, I'm sure people will correct me, have committed to go 100% solar, including solar panels both on the temple and in the town, and solar trees, and also solar lights. In Jordan, over 500 mosques are currently generating power from solar energy or switching to solar energy. And they have a commitment to cover all 6,500 mosques in the country with solar energy. And in the area of organizing, the RISE Coalition, Resilient Indigenous Sisters Engaging Coalition, is on the front lines to stop Line 3, a misguided and dangerous oil pipeline which failed to secure informed consent of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. This is an oil pipeline that is being reconstructed from an older model that's now defunct, and it is going through tribal and treaty territories in Minnesota. The organization Buddhist Global Relief, in partnership with Oxfam and Ecology Action, is training farmers in Uganda and Malawi in climate resilient agricultural practices. So a few examples of what I think are some really phenomenal climate commitments in 3 different areas. And that should give you a sense of, kind of some of the climate commitments that we're seeing coming to the fore right now. So with that, let me see if we have Charles back. Charles, can you hear us? I think we may not. So let's keep forging ahead. At this point, I'm going to invite anyone to either raise their hand or write in the Q&A that you'd like to speak, and we will begin our discussion. And I see a raised hand, Forrest Klingerman. Let me find you and unmute you. Okay, Forrest, I think you should be unmuted now. Maybe not. Okay. Jean Duff, and I apologize, everybody. I'm moderating and doing logistics here, so I'm doing double duty. Let me see if I can find Jean.
Joshua, while you're searching, can I address the question of turning point, perhaps?
Sure.
I think as we're looking to COP26, it's probably misguided to think that the outcome of COP26 is going to, in and of itself, be a turning point. And maybe in a way that is the turning point itself, because our disappointment, the disappointment of people around the world, even the outrage at the lack of action from countries could be that turning point. We're at a turning point, no matter whether COP26 and our countries recognize it or not. We've seen the fires expand across our planet, and we'll see more of it as summer reaches the southern hemisphere, to the point that some have even suggested let's start calling it the Pyrocene. We've seen the floods, we've seen the hurricanes, we've seen the difference in storms, we've seen we've seen the impact on those who are least responsible for what we're facing in terms of their emissions. And it's up to us to determine what our action is going to be. Now, political action is going to be a part of that, there's no question, because ultimately this problem is not going to be addressed until countries look to the future and stop looking just to the past and look to global interest and stop looking just to their narrow national interests. And so this is a turning point, regardless of how our countries react in COP26. Let's be hopeful. Let's hope that we will see this week the United States and China come forward with something that is clearly ambitious, that reaches far beyond what they have talked about so far. But if they don't, then let's not accept it. Let's realize that the future belongs to us as much as it does to government policymakers. And if that becomes the turning point, then perhaps we'll see more of the courage and the commitment and the creativity that you just showed with those few commitments that you've shown, and which are commitments which are representative of what's happening all across the planet. So let's take this as a turning point, regardless of what the countries at COP26 do.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, David, for that hopeful note, that very eloquent, hopeful note. Okay, so I've got 4 hands raised. It looks like we do have Jean with us now, so over to you, Jean.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for the this forum. It's very helpful. Certainly agreeing with the speakers so far that the faith community is powerful and diverse in its various interventions and actions in relation to climate change. Really agree with Corinna Gore's call to us to come together as never before at COP26. It would be very helpful if we could on this in this gathering share information about what's being done to try to unite the faith voice, both leading up to COP26, and I know that there's work going on with the UK, Italy, and the Vatican in developing a common statement, and also if folks could inform us what's happening at COP26 itself, as a way of bringing us out of perhaps our silos and into a united, powerful faith voice for advocacy and for activities. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. Excellent questions. I wonder, Emma, we have Emma Judkins with us from the COP26 unit. I wonder if you'd like to respond on the latter part of Jean's question about what's happening with COP26 and outreach to faith groups, since we unfortunately seem to have lost Charles, which I'm really sad about. I was looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, I'm first of all sorry for that. I think Charles, you can see he's having a lot of connection issues. So apologies for that, everyone. As for preparation for COP in the faith space, the presidency launched an expression of interest for the kind of presidency run areas, and we've had a lot of interest from faith groups, so there'll be kind of events going on. And more specifically within the Blue Zone, the Interfaith Liaison Committee is the kind of official faith representative. So we've got the UNFCCC has 9 observer groups, and they include youth, environmental NGOs, Indigenous peoples, and faith is a kind of non-official observer to the UNFCCC, the Interfaith Liaison Committee. So they would be the best point of contact for faith and spiritual groups to get in contact with and try and align your efforts in the run up to COP would be my recommendation. I'm really happy to put anyone in touch. If you'd like to maybe get in touch with me first, and I'm happy to make introductions. I'll put my email in the chat again. You've frozen for me, Joshua, so I really hope you can hear me. Please do tell me if my connection's also letting me down.
Yes, we can hear you, and David's giving you a thumbs up, so I think he can hear you. Must be the fog in the UK that's causing some internet issues, but thank you, Emma, for that and for putting your information in the chat. Emma and the rest of the folks on her team are a great resource, and so I really encourage you to reach out to them if you have questions or want to be engaged in the COP26 process. Thank you, Jean, for those questions, and I'm going to go to, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but I'm only saying part of it, Asana. Asan Khan. And you can unmute, Asan.
Thanks, Joshua. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. No, this is great, by the way. I actually came across this event, I think, on Twitter, and it's new to me. I come from a Muslim organization here in the UK, in London, and I'm building a deck at the moment, trying to help educate some of my friends and the community and the network about the connections between Islam and ecology. The challenge is, because this is what we're facing in terms of climate crisis and plastic in the ocean, it's not that old, comparing it to other things. And it's sometimes difficult for, the older generation to somehow understand it. Now, you've shared some really great stories in terms of, what you showed in Jordan, the mosques and, the temple and everywhere else about and religious movements coming forward and actually taking action. And then, we got the mention earlier on about prophetic, pastoral and practical, get your house in order. And I think they're really great kind of inspirational messages. I was just wondering, where else could I find, great case studies like this that will probably help me build a case to help get the influence here in the UK working at a much more kind of urgent pace that we want. And where else can I kind of network and build some, I suppose, evidence and knowledge around this?
That's a great question. Thank you, Asan, for that question. And I'll take a shot at it, and then I'll let anyone else speak to it as well. One great resource is the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale University, which is run by a woman named Mary Evelyn Tucker and her husband, John Grimm, two folks who've been in the academic interfaith and faith-based environmental movement for decades. And they have created a website, a web-based platform with information not just about, sort of academically about faiths and environmentalism and climate change, but they've also created an inventory of what they call engaged projects, which are projects that are living out this kind of moral and ethical obligation on environment and climate. So I'd really encourage you to visit that website. We also just began a partnership with the Forum on Religion and Ecology and a group called United Religions Initiative to inventory faith-based progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So that project is up on there as well. And there's a lot of climate-oriented projects that we've included there. So both of those are phenomenal resources, and I'll put the URLs in the chat for those.
Joshua also is, oops, sorry for the echo. Just going to the websites of the sponsors of this provide a terrific library of actions that are being taken, and particularly actions that have been successful, good case studies that you can look at. I would also recommend the UNEP Faith for Earth program, which also catalogs and pulls together a wide range of interests from around the planet. And as I'm looking at the chat function, there are great suggestions there as well. And I hope that those of you who are listening in would put your own suggestions and your own references in that chat function. We're always in need of building more. And if one thing has come clear to me in the past 6 years of the climate program at the Parliament, it is that there is so much more happening in faith-based communities around the world that that is based in a tremendous amount of power and influence. If you take those of us who have some commitment in our lives to a faith, and you think of what we spend on an annual basis, and think of each of those dollars, pesos, whatever they are, as a vote. Every one of those that we spend should be a vote for the future, not a vote for the past. And that impact, once started, will be like a rock being thrown into a pond, and the waves will move out from that. So there is great reason for hope. But perhaps even more than that, there is, I hope, an example to be found there that tells our politicians that they don't have to be afraid of those who are afraid. What they can do is align themselves with those of us who are not afraid. And then we will see from that, perhaps not at COP26, but at future COPs, a more ambitious commitment on the part of governments.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Asan, for that question. I'm going to go now to Henrik Grape. Good to have you with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm happy to hear all of this energy and this spirit among different faith communities to be active on COP26 and on the climate issues. I am the co-chair of the Interfaith Liaison Committee that Emma just mentioned about, so I'm happy to receive much more of connection to you who will be there. First, I would say that at the start of the COP on the 31st of October, we will have a Talanoa dialogue. It's inviting all people of faith to an afternoon at the first day of the COP, it will be now, where we will share with each other what we are doing on climate issues and what we see for COP26. And we will also have a time to share a meal and also have a service together in the synagogue in Glasgow. So I'm happy to share this with you who will be there physically, because this is the other problem, and that relates also to what Karena said earlier. It is that there are many people from our global south that will be excluded from this COP. They're often excluded from COPs, but this one in particular, we are risking to have a very sort of European, North American oriented and the industrial countries oriented COP, and the voices of those from most affected by climate change today are not going to be there. And I see that this is very important for the faith communities to come there and bring those voices, because they are the most sort of effective and also with no voice, and the tragic is that they have not contributed to the climate change that we are seeing today. So remember that I think that faith communities all over the world have this prophetic thing to do during COP and before COP and after COP, to bring those voices forward to the really change that we are in such a great need of. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Henrik. That's a really, really, really important point. I think we in the interfaith movement often talk about representation of marginalized people and folks in the developing world in the global south and those who are most impacted by climate change, the cry of the poor, as the Pope says. But this is a concrete moment when we can live that out, you know, to actually represent them in these international negotiations. So I really appreciate that point, and I think it's important. I'm going to go now.
Could I come in on what Henrik said?
Yes, please.
Because I thought there was a part of it that is particularly relevant to this audience. So many of our faith-based organizations are so excellent at the pastoral role, and so many are so weak at the prophetic role. And it is time now, perhaps, for us to be much more prophetic and much stronger in making sure that our voice is clear and that our voice is inclusive. And the point about representation at COPs, which Richard Marker also makes in the Q&A box, is true of all COPs, because rich nations can send bigger delegations, do better research, and tailor that research to their positions in ways that often diminish the voice of the G77, the countries which are least responsible and most impacted by all of this. So at COP26, yes, let's call attention to this, but beyond COP26, there is a role for faith communities in helping to build that capacity in other countries as well, and we should step up and address that. And my compliments to Iyad Abu-Mogli and to UNEP for the work that they're doing. And again, I would refer you to the Faith for Earth program on the UNEP website as something that would give you a great sense for what's going on at the below governmental level. And also on the UNDP website, there are a series of commitments and information as well for things that are happening at the country level, and that's very much worth looking at.
Thank you. I second that endorsement of the Faith for Earth initiative and our very close colleague Iyad Abou-Mogli, who is doing great work on many fronts. And also, if you have a look in the chat, I think that Iyad's colleague Esmira has posted a link for a portal where they have collected climate commitments from the interfaith community. So that's another important resource. There are lots of great resources coming into the chat, and we will collate them and create an anthology afterwards. That's part of the really the importance of this summit, is to be able to share all of those resources with you. I have a 570 number. I'm going to unmute you. Welcome.
Hi, this is Rabbi Daniel Schwartz. Sorry that I have to join from phone, but can you hear me, Joshua?
Yes, we can, and welcome, Rabbi Schwartz. Good to have you.
Good to be here. I wanted to reflect on a couple things that have been said, both to support them and in some case to take a slightly different viewpoint. I mean, I think when we talk about commitments, it's very important for that to have first and foremost a political commitment, to make sure that we see this as something that has to happen in the public sphere. You know, when you think back to the civil rights era in the United States and in many countries around the world, yes, faith groups helped with dialogues, helped on an individual level with people's prejudices, but mostly we were helping get people motivated to pass civil rights legislation, which was needed if there was ever going to be any move towards justice. I don't want to belittle greening our congregations, and especially the slightly more system level of individual congregations divesting, but we really need to be thinking on a global scale, and that means that we have to press countries to make commitments. We have to press major banks and other sources of major investments to divest and to stop funding fossil fuel infrastructure. Otherwise, all the greening of congregation in the world is not gonna shift things. And that really is the deepest level of prophetic voice. Now, it always helps if as a prophet you walk your talk, and that is one reason for us to be looking at our own house, to make sure that we're being that we're not being hypocritical and asking from others something that we're not doing ourselves. But we have to ask others. We have to remain in the public sphere. Jean mentioned that there's an initiative from Britain and Italy and the Vatican, which I'm a part of, and I imagine there may be others on the call. Over the past 9 months, under Pope Francis's leadership, an interfaith, a very broad interfaith, not Western associated group of folks have come together on a monthly basis to talk about climate change from a faith standpoint, and we're meeting in just 2 weeks in the Vatican to sign a declaration that has been worked on together by these diverse faith leaders from across the globe. Now, the thing that is not yet set, and that folks on this call could really play a role in, is what happens with that declaration. It's not as strong as I would have liked it to be, but it does really call for a major shift in the governments of the world in terms of what their priorities are in terms of justice and sustainability. And at the very least, it's an excellent floor to start from. It's not quite the ceiling we might have liked. And when I'm there in Rome, one of the things I'm going to be pressing for is a mechanism for that document to be signed by others. And I think having something that's drafted by Eastern and Western religions, by people from island nations and Aboriginal cultures, as well as European nations, the North and the South, as a starting place for people of faith to get behind a common call, not by the hundreds or by the thousands, but by the millions, really could have some significant impact. And so, you know, hopefully in one way or another, we will have mechanisms for folks to be able to join that call and spread it really far and wide. And I really think that is one way, and because we can sign that online at least. That is something that then makes it much easier for folks around the world to have at least that level of participation. And I know that the president of COP26 is aware of the document and spoke to the group, and that the Pope and other representatives from the Vatican will be presenting it. So I really think that this is one action that folks should get keyed into. Being on the phone, I can't leave my contacts in the chat because I can't chat, but my email address is rabbidaniel, RABBIDANIEL @comcast.net. And I will certainly send to Joshua as soon as we've got the final version of the document signed, what that is, and ways for folks to participate and to join in signing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. David,
Daniel, you'll be happy to know that in the chat there are a number of entries endorsing what you just said. So thank you for that. But you're getting a nice, strong response in the chat box, and we'll copy it and send it to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Rabbi Schwartz, I really appreciate what you said about the kind of internal and external dynamic, you know, that we have to keep our house in order, but also make sure that we're being present in the public sphere and the political sphere. I think that's those are kind of like dual pressures on the interfaith community that we really need to be internalizing. I wonder also, while we have you, I know it's a busy week for you, and I want to wish you a Gemar Chatima Tova and a happy Sukkot. If you could talk a little bit about some of the commitments that Kojal has made, your organization.
Sure. Really, I would want to speak more broadly about a number of organizations in the Jewish community that are working on climate and who have, I really believe, taken the prophetic call of being involved in the public sphere very seriously. Mirla Goldsmith and the Jewish Earth Alliance, Rabbi Jenny Rosen and Dahlia Rockowitz and Phil Arano and Dayenu, Rabbi Arthur Waskow and the Shalom Center, and as well as the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life, have been engaging in policy actions and, you know, blowing the shofar in senatorial offices, and bringing next week we'll be bringing a sukkah to the offices of some senators in Maryland, and then taking the sukkah on the back of a pickup truck. There's a passage that talks about, can you put a sukkah on a camel? And we don't have any camels, but a pickup truck will have to do, and bringing it down toward the White House and the mall, and really trying to make this a big part of what it means in public life to be Jewish, to really call this out. So we've been working specifically in Kojal and training rabbis and Jewish clergy through a series of webinars on different issues, some very directly related to climate, like water infrastructure and environmental justice, and some less so in terms of public lands and endangered species, but all of them trying to empower Jewish leaders to speak up often loudly and clearly on these issues as issues of faith. I really think that the more that we help people understand the fundamental moral dimensions of climate change, the more we can shift the dynamics of the discussion from from right-left questions to questions about standing in solidarity with all of humankind.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rabbi Schwartz. Really appreciate all of the work that you do, and especially in the public sphere and in the political system. If you do find a way to put a stick on a camel, that's definitely something that I want to see. So again,
we'll do
it. All right. Take care. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to go to, we have one more person with a hand raised. I'm going to go to Frank Breen in just a moment. And I want to also invite anyone else to raise your hand. I can unmute you and you can speak, particularly the co-sponsors, Dalia, Dianu, I think that you had mentioned you wanted to speak, and Esben at WRI, and Michelle at Faith in the Common Good, and Susan, and all the, I think we had probably 15 co-sponsors. So not to call you out, but if you would like to speak, please do raise your hand. And I'm going to go to Frank now. Frank, you are able to unmute.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm a Maryknoll priest, and I'm reporting right now from the Maryknoll headquarters in Ossining, New York. We just put up huge solar panel canopies on our parking lot. The two huge parking lots that we have, and these will provide electricity for some 2,000 homes in Ossining, New York. Just a few things we've always heard about public-private partnership. In this case, it was public-private and profit partnership, and that might be the way to go. We worked through a very good company, responsible company that put up the installations and the panels called Ecology, located in Long Island in New York. And then we had to work through local government and county government as well. And we were lucky, the town of Ossining and Westchester County. For those of you who don't know, Westchester County is a wealthy county just north of New York City. But we had very good cooperation from all government officials as well. So this is probably the way to go, certainly here in the United States. I don't know what the mosques are doing in Jordan, whether they're doing the same thing, public, private, and nonprofit partnership, or whether they're just putting them up themselves with government funding for the installation. I don't know how they're going, but in the United States, that's probably the best way to go. Final point, local government here is all Democratic controlled, and that's why it made it so simple for us to do it. Town government, the congressional representatives, our two senators in New York State, the people at the Assembly in New York State, and even county government. They're all Democrats. They were very supportive, very easy to work with. The neighboring town called Newcastle is a Republican town. I suspect we would not have had the same cooperation with them. This might apply to evangelical churches now down in southern states of the United States, because a certain number of them would probably consider putting up solar panels. But they're in Republican states, and will they get the same cooperation from government? If not, then that's something we have to work on here in the United States. We have to get both parties on board that solar panels are a non-political issue. This is just an environmental issue. This is a faith issue, and we all have to work together, and hopefully we'll have that full participation. But it is something in America, at least in the United States, it seems that this is probably the way to go, a public-private, nonprofit partnership to provide non-renewable forms of energy. That's basically all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for that story. I think that's a really excellent point. The partnerships between government entities and also businesses are really important when you want to deploy solar panels to the extent, having a major array. I think I do know that in the example that we gave in Jordan of the mosques, there is a Jordanian ministry that has been involved in deploying those solar panels on mosques and assisting with that. And there may be some subsidies. I think our colleague Iyad Abu Mughli, who's based in Amman, can speak to that as well. But I think that's a really good point. Those partnerships are very important. And as you said, there are some government officials who are more, let's say, welcoming of renewable energy than others. So you are lucky to be in a place where you're able to have those partnerships. And thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you.
Actually, Joshua, I'm pretty sure luck has not much to do with it. A lot has to do with and thank you, Father Frank, for what you said. But a lot has to do with our controlling the environments, our making the environment in which we live conducive to that kind of sustainability. And it can be done through cooperative efforts as well. I live on an island off the coast of Maine. There's a local group here called A Climate to Thrive. And what that group is leading is a community solar project that individuals who can't afford to put up solar panels on their own homes can then subscribe to shares within that broader effort and share both the profits and the benefits from doing that. So cooperative approaches certainly work and perhaps maybe are more possible in poorer communities.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Father, for that story. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go to Grove Harris now.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm glad we're having this organizing session. I just want to think about, for COP, influencing the governments usually requires local, governmental action. And I just want to emphasize, I think that most of our religious traditions are transnational corporations of great scale. And I wonder if the argument needs to be made that of the billions of dollars that are going into redressing climate disasters happening now, the religious traditions are actually footing a bunch of that bill in terms of being first responders to providing all kinds of services, in terms of being educators, in terms of hospitals. So I know we've talked about divestment, and I think that's a really powerful tool to call for, really, really important. And obviously change has to come up from the grassroots. So all of these activities are really important. But in a political setting, I think it's important to claim status as a non-political but political player, and to the size of the faith response in terms of monies spent redressing this climate disasters that are happening is a powerful argument that translates into governmental discourse. I mean, so we're both making obviously a values-based, let's change it now or yesterday, but also a call for this is, obviously the only way forward, but there's also a dollars and cents piece to it that I think our religious traditions could get behind. So excited to be on this call. Thank you all. Obviously pulling together is exactly where we need to be. I don't think we can give up on making the difference at this COP. No matter how weak it appears to be, I think we have to hold out for making that difference. And I really appreciate the call for religious communities speaking for their global South voices, because I think that they have that reach. So that kind of representation is part of what I think our religious traditions can make. Last comment, I'm hearing great things about what Jordan is doing. I believe it's a woman from Jordan who's going to be the next head of UN Women. And I think those kind of partnerships, that if faith traditions could also say, we see that education of women and girls and their full partnership is clearly part of the SDGs and the change we need around climate, so that even additional lateral alliances could really serve us well. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Grove. Those are all really excellent points. And I think that final point is just a super important one, that this idea of that raising up women and girls is going to solve not just an inequality problem, but so many other problems. Agriculture will be more sustainable and equitable. We'll do better work on the climate crisis. We'll have better biodiversity outcomes. That is like a core intersectional thing. So I really appreciate you mentioning education and raising up of women and girls. Thank you. I'm gonna go to Dahlia Rockowitz now with Dianu.
Hi, everyone. Let's see, trying to figure out, can't figure out how to turn my camera on, but it's great to be here with all of you. And I know that Daniel just spoke briefly about the work in the Jewish community, and listening to this conversation, and this point, has been made, but want to really emphasize this, the role of the moral voice of the faith community. And so many speak to how they're inspired by the youth movement, by the Sunrise movement in the US, by Fridays of the Future. And I feel like the faith community can be a corollary to that in raising our voices. And when it comes to making the COP a turning point, it's really about holding our own governments accountable. The only way these governments are going to reach and exceed their targets under the Paris Agreement and beyond is that they see that there's some level of accountability, and the youth movement is really doing that. And we as the faith community need to be speaking into that public square. We need to be engaging in these conversations, and we need to show that we expect our governments to do more, and we will hold them accountable if they don't. And to that end, I wanted to share an initiative that Dianu Jewish Call to Climate Action ran this summer. I'll put the link in the chat to the campaign homepage. But this is an example of, in our case, Jewishly rooted, but faith-rooted action that enables us to take political action in a way that's meaningful, that's rooted in tradition, that's rooted in community. And so we worked with volunteer leaders across the United States to host 16 actions outside of Senate offices, demanding for big and bold investments in climate, in good jobs and in justice, in a current piece of legislation that's being considered in front of the US Congress, and is going to be key to the US reaching its current commitment to 50 to 52% greenhouse gas emissions reductions, which is by far too low. But the only way to do that is going to be through this systemic change, through this legislation. And so if others are thinking about how to get involved, how to do this public facing action, how to hold their elected officials accountable in a way that feels aligned and meaningful to their faith tradition, happy to share more about our experiences and happy to work together. So I will put my my email address in the chat. For groups in the US, we focus on US policy, so real opportunities to directly work together, and for others around the world, happy to share best practices, what we've learned along the way. And again, glad to be here today. And this community is so important, and I really just call us to do things that might be new or uncomfortable because the climate crisis is demanding us to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you for being here and for partnering with us on this summit and for all the work you're doing in the Jewish community. I'm going to go to Espen Larsen with the World Resources Institute. Welcome, Espen.
Thank you so much. And great meeting you all. Representing a secular think tank, the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C., but working with faith-based organizations. I'm really happy to be here today. One of the things we normally do is working with governments and the global companies, the UN, the World Bank, and so on. But now we also work with faith-based organizations with a clear goal of assisting faith-based organizations in climate advocacy, in equitable development, but also in emissions reduction. One of the things we have seen analyzing the entire faith environment is really that very few know what they emit, how they impact climate. So when faith-based organizations meet government or meet businesses or even meet their followers with the message about doing something about the climate and environment, they really don't have a baseline and an understanding of it. So I shared in the chat that we at World Resources Institute are developing science-based targets for faith, simply to establish baselines of emission reduction potentiality, but also looking into a number of aspects when it comes to how can one engage in climate advocacy towards political stakeholders. One of the challenges is, of course, that a lot of faith-based organizations meet the political level with soft power, but there is actually also a way of doing it more intentionally. When we look at many governments around the world, they have made recovery packages after the COVID situation, but they are also more or less all of them obligated to reduce their climate impacts. For instance, with the new Biden administration here in the US, a lot of the governments around the world, they don't realize that faith-based organizations own an enormous amount of land, buildings, have transportation, and so on. So if a national country wants to deliver on its national inventory into the Paris Climate Accord, they really need faith-based organizations as collaboration partners. And way too many faith-based organizations don't realize that and don't take part in that conversation with governments across the world. So we are really into this to partner up with faith-based organizations to measure their emissions, but also to engage in the conversation with governments, with global companies, to have a better platform together on doing this. So we don't stand in one side at Yale to the governments, but we actually meet in the middle and have these conversations, because it's difficult as a faith-based organization to say to governments, you should do more, if faith-based organizations don't do a lot on scale with their own assets. And we are very, very happy to play the role of being engaged with both sides of the aisle. And being a theologian myself, I have quite a good idea of how it is to work with both sides. So just to say that we are very happy to be part of this conversation. We think that you do excellent work in your organizations, which is very inspirational to us, but that it is actually possible on a science-based ground to enter into an even more obligating conversation. Thank you.
Espen, this is David Hales. That is a great point, and you suggest a very powerful partnership. I just put up in the chat box a few facts with credit to Iyad Abu-Mogli and to UNEP about the potential power that faith-based organizations have around the world. And these facts make the point that you were making. Faith-based organizations own 8% of the habitable land of this planet, 50% of the schools worldwide, 2/3 of the schools in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a basis for action that is quite significant, and the kind of partnership with WRI in the US and around the world, with the Union of Concerned Scientists, with so many others, to measure that impact is terrifically important, because once we can calibrate and measure that impact, not only can we celebrate it better, but it becomes a better example.
Great points. Thank you, Espen. I think in the US alone, there's more than 300,000 houses of worship. So, when you mentioned, Espen, that this level of assets, it is massive. The real estate and assets that are controlled by faith-based organizations, and I think you're right. We've got to walk the walk with our own operation. So really appreciate the work that you're doing at WRI and really inspired by it. Thanks again. Couple more hands raised here. We've got Meher, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
I'd like to share something. Here in the west coast of India, near Sanjan, the heavy rains have created havoc for the crops. I would like to ask how interfaith organizations can cooperate with each other for providing the food supplies that are needed for continuing the Earth's population. I'm not thinking only of people and human beings, but the animal world and also the birds have been severely affected, and thousands of birds are dying because of this excessively heavy rain. And also, of course, animals are in great distress, especially the cattle and the dogs. If there's some way in which the interfaith organizations can cooperate with each other, please reach out to me. I've given my email address on the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Meher. Appreciate that. And you know, one of the things that this summit and the work that we do at Parliaments is intended for is to connect people around the world in a kind of, you know, global map of interfaith organizations. So if there are any organizations working on the west coast of India from the interfaith world, you know, that is a connection that we'd be happy to help make for you. Thanks for your comments. We've got one more hand raised, Susanna Tuttle, who's at North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. And so I'm going to go to her, and if anyone else wants to make a comment or has a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. So over to you, Susanna.
Hi, Josh. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you in a morning time zone, and some of you it's very late as well. I introduced myself early in the chat. My name is Susanna Tuttle. I serve on staff of the North Carolina Council of Churches and have directed the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light program for over a decade. But in this particular context of conversation, I just wanted to share a couple of resources. And I really resonate, David, with what you said, and Grove and Esfon with WRI about the power of the faith community, both literally and figuratively and spiritually, obviously. I am currently serving as the community liaison communications point of contact for what is known as the U.S. Fair Share. And just briefly, I am going to be speaking about this at the Parliament of World Religions, dropping the link in the chat right now at 10 a.m. Eastern on, or excuse me, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Sunday of the Parliament, convening with our team, including Elizabeth Lee from United Methodist Women and our team from Equity and all of the organizations, including ActionAid USA, Friends of the Earth, Center for Biological Diversity, People's Justice Council. There's a number of organizations that have been working domestically here in the United States to do exactly what we're speaking about with regards to leveraging the moral imperative for governments to act and invest the climate finance necessary in order to address the climate emergency at the levels that we need to, and also from a faith-based perspective, show up in that space, which I think all of you that are attending COP will be able to do, and represent the over $57 trillion that religious communities around the world have pledged in the form of divestment, but in the ways that we now need to be talking about reinvestment. And to the point about the nationally determined contributions of what each country will be showing up at the COP with, what President Biden's administration and the United States has put forward is not actually what the United States fair share is in relationship to our cause of historical emissions, of the problem, the fact that we're the richest country in the history of the world, and that it is the right thing for us to do to show up and actually commit to what our US fair share is. And CAN International, Climate Action Network International, has made it very clear that they want and need, especially in representation of the countries that will not have delegates in person, to be discussing what fair shares is and how that correlates to climate finance. And the most important conversation that still has been very elusive at all the COPs, which is to really address the actual cost of what loss and damage means. And I appreciate Meher hearing about your experience on the coast of India and the loss that you are experiencing at this time. This is not just financial loss and desecration, obviously, of properties, economic loss. This is loss of culture and loss of species. And so that language of loss and damage is not going to be introduced by any government officials. Even in the United States, we've been meeting with the State Department and a Special Envoy Kerry's office, and they are asking us in the US Climate Action Network, and particularly in faith-based initiatives, to explain what we mean by loss and damage and how that fits into the climate finance packages. And of course, we know at the domestic level, at the country level, a lot is moving in the United States right now with the reconciliation budget, and whether or not climate finance will be included in that is absolutely critical and imperative to how we show up as a country at COP. And so the international solidarity opportunities for faith communities to come together and have a unified voice to demand fair shares, the focus on climate finance, what loss and damage really means, and to continue to beat that drum will be the change that we see that can happen and must happen at this particular COP. And I think for those of us that are not going to be attending in person, we also want to have a very coordinated domestic and international solidarity communication strategy. So that's what I'm looking forward to as well. I know Reverend Susan Hendershot from Interfaith Power and Light will be attending. We know a lot of other folks. We are planning on doing ideally daily briefings live so that we can be communicating with our faith communities all across the globe as the conversations are happening, and then re-amplifying what you all are saying in Glasgow here at home, because this cannot be a one-off isolated international, convening that very, very, very few people are actually physically able to attend. And in the equitability perspective of the lack of distribution of vaccines, there's so many, moral aspects to what is happening that already have been mentioned. And I think the coming together, I think the Parliament, convening happening 2 weeks before, and then someone also dropped into the international direct actions that will be happening through the Faiths for Climate visibility events that are also happening consecutively with the Parliament is hugely powerful and profound. And I'm just really excited that you've pulled this all together. Thank you, Joshua, for the time to speak. And I will also finally drop into the chat what the United States of America Fair Shares Nationally Determined Contribution document that so many of us worked on, to be clear as to what we really need to be doing. This is all going to come down to who is going to pay for it. And we have a lot to pony up from the faith communities. Again, that $57 trillion is a lot to bring to the table. So let's show up and demand that the government and business sectors match what we have already pledged as religious communities. Thank you.
Susanna, that's terrific. Thank you for all of that. Having spent a large part of my adult life as an employee of the US government and as a negotiator in previous COPs, let me point out that by this time for COP26, we're too late. Yes, let's emphasize it, let's make our points, let's continue to make our points, but I would encourage all of you to focus on COP27. The place where we can affect policy is in advance and in our own countries, and the work that Susanna just outlined has a tremendous potential impact, not so much perhaps on the position of the US at COP26, although I would hope it would, but for COP27. And so as we're too often behind faith-based organizations and particularly environmental NGOs, because we tend to focus on the COP that is immediately coming up, when in fact we can begin to start affecting the policy for 27 and 28. And getting in front of the curve is critically important in our efforts. And I would hope that the kind of good work that we've seen in the chat and the kinds of things, Susanna, that you just went across, doesn't kind of take a vacation after COP26, because that's when we need to really focus in on COP27, on affecting policy before it's made, not trying to change it after it's made.
Well said, both Susanna and David. Thank you. Susanna, I love your energy. I feel like you're always just like raring to go, and it is really refreshing. Thank you for all your work with the fair shares. I have one more hand raised, and that's Richard Marker. So going over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks very much for this convening. I want to underscore a couple things, but I don't want to repeat the importance of acting in the political sphere. One comment about that. There are doors that are open to us in the faith community that are not open to other civil society organizations. We don't necessarily have to have all the lobbying money that private industry has to be able to get the ear of political leaders. But I want to come back to a point that was talked about at the very beginning, and I don't want it to get lost. We have a responsibility to make sure that we adopt the policies, proactive policies, to impact renewable energy policies and economic policies and so forth. But we in the faith communities also have to be aware that a lot of damage has already been done. And we can't lose sight of the fact that we will have responsibility for refugees. There will be asylum seekers. There's going to be economic dislocation that is inevitable at this stage. And so as much as we need to be forceful in terms of what we just heard from Susanna and others as well, we also in the religious communities have to organize ourselves in anticipation of what we know is going to be in front of us over the next decade or so. So we have to be positive, proactive in having much better policies and influence much better policies around the world, but also be anticipatory of the dislocations around the world, especially as we said at the beginning of this conversation in the global South, that the existing damage is already brought about. So it's a real responsibility that we have in the international interfaith community to address both of those at the same time.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. That is the end of our raised hands. We are at 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern Time. And I do see that there are folks who have to get off the call to do other things. So I'm happy to start to wrap us up. I want to give any stragglers an opportunity to make any last comments, or to David and Emma, if you'd like to make any last comments, and then we'll close. Grove, are you wanting to comment again?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people that the Food Systems Summit is happening this week, and there's already one of the special rapporteurs from outside of that process has created a set of human rights-based questions to evaluate the corporate takeover of that summit. And I think what we need is a human rights approach, because that's the language of the UN that fits with the dignity of our religious calls. I just strongly do not feel that we cannot wait another minute to be as loud as possible in all of our avenues. And faith traditions are all about providing food. So I'd love to have us convene again relatively soon. I'll put together some work on the human rights aspect and also link you all to Forum 2021, which was again about food and faith, because it's totally related to the climate change. So the COP is not just one place. These are all interrelated areas, and all of us need to have our materials be able to move into the different arenas. So thanks again, Josh, appreciate it.
Thank you, Grove. Important point about the intersectionality of COP26 with other international processes. I'll also say that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is currently being developed and negotiated, and of course, massive intersection there as well. Grove, I love what you said about we can't wait another minute to be as loud as possible. That is great. Well said. Any final comments from folks? I see Manahar. Let me put Manahar up. Manahar Grul is a member of Parliament's Climate Action Task Force. Over to you, Manahar. Manahar, you have to, I've given you permission to unmute, but you've got to hit the unmute button to speak.
Okay. It was very, very nice, and a lot of information was there. I wanted to add is that we have a Parliament of World Religion virtual convention on 17th and 18th October, and I will suggest everybody to try to join it. There will be a lot of papers on climate programs, and there will be discussions and climate commitment also. So please attend that and go to the Parliament website, and you can register, and you'll get further information on these, especially on the climate commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manahar. So with that, I am going to put up my slides again and start to close us out. David and Emma, if you have any final words, please please go ahead.
I'm still too young to have final words.
I guess it's just a big thank you from me and for everyone for sharing their thoughts and what has been a really interesting discussion. And I think, Joshua, you said this earlier, just the energy and the commitment from everyone is so palpable, and will really help set the tone for success, I think, at COP26, but also future COPs. And as I said, I've put my email in the chat box, so please do reach out. I can see a few people have already, and I'll follow up with you after this. But thank you so much, Joshua and David.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you for all of your work, for all of the outreach you've done to the faith community, and for putting forth all of your best efforts to make this COP a success. So a couple of things. First of all, immense gratitude to all of you for joining us today and just for sticking with us for an hour and a half plus conversation. I have found it incredibly illuminating, and I hope we do have an opportunity to do another one of these. We will have a recording of this session available. It'll be posted to YouTube, and I will send that out to all of you. On that same email, I will also send out, as I mentioned, the anthology or collation of the resources that were put into the chat. So you'll have that as well. I know a lot of folks were mentioning that. I want to again thank our co-sponsors. Thank you to David Hales and Corinna Gore, and to Charles Ogilvie and Emma Judkins. This slide shows you some ways to stay in touch with both the UK COP26 presidency and the Parliament of World Religions. As Manahar and others have mentioned, we are having a parliament convening, a virtual parliament convening, the first one in our over 100-year history, from October 16th to 18th. We'll have some pretty great speakers. I think Jane Goodall will be speaking, the Dalai Lama will be speaking, many religious and civil society leaders from different traditions and backgrounds all over the world, in addition to 500 breakout sessions, around 50 of which will be climate and environment focused. So if you want to engage in more conversations and educational experiences like this, the Parliament is a great place to do that, and you can register on our homepage at parliamentofreligions.org. So with that, thank you all again. It was a pleasure being with you, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.